Thanks for staying with us right here on Sunrise as we continue on our focus this morning now with the rise of corruption, collusion and money laundering in not only in South Africa but the world over. The Financial Intelligence Center Amendment Bill is a welcome solution for many. Now, the FICA Bill aims to fight corruption in the finance sector and will aid banks in monitoring illegal practices, amongst others. Now, last week, the Minister of Finance, Malusi Gigaba, signed and gazetted provisions of the Act to be implemented by here to really help us, of course, to understand the nitty-gritty details of the bill is Deputy Director General from the National Treasury, Ismail Momoniat. Remember, you can be part of our conversation by giving us a call on 011-447-1742 or 1620. Your comments are also welcome on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Good morning to you, Sam. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Penny, and to the viewers.
So let's just take a few steps back and really just try to understand exactly what is this FICA Bill all about and the significance of it for us to sign it as a country.
Okay, look, firstly, the FICA Bill is about amending the current FICA Act, which anyway has been dealing with money laundering and the combating of financing of terrorism since 2003. What the bill does is it just brings our anti-money laundering legislation up to date with the most recent international standards. So, for example, it deals with the whole concept of what FATF calls politically exposed persons or customer due diligence, how financial institutions and other institutions do due diligence on their customers. They've got to know their customer. Secondly, it deals with beneficial ownership, which is if you have companies as clients, who's the ultimate owners of that company? Thirdly, and most importantly, it adopts a risk-based approach for institutions when they are trying to assess their customers. So in other words, they've got to assess how much risk are they to, for example, prone to money laundering and so on. And this means that obviously if you're high risk, they've got to take certain enhanced due diligence measures. If you're low risk, it should actually make it easier for you compared to say what's the current situation, because there's just a simplified customer due diligence.
Okay, so there was a bit of a 6 months delay with the bill being taken back to the president, and there were a lot of more public hearings. Just take us through that process. There were provisions that the president was concerned about them being unconstitutional. What was all that about?
Okay, so that related to a provision in the bill which dealt with what was warrantless searches. The objection that the president tabled with Parliament was that he felt that that particular provision may be prone to constitutional challenge, and he wanted Parliament to re-look at that, which the committee duly did in the National Assembly, and that was sort of resolved by making some slight amendments to the bill. Thereafter, the president, when it went back to the president in May signed the bill into law. And then, was it last week or week before last, the Minister of Finance put out the dates for the coming into operation of the sections of the bill. So what's actually happened now is that many measures in the bill have already taken effect on the 13th of June this month. Many more will take effect on the 2nd of October because we require a bit of consultation, and a small number will take effect in the next 6 to 9 months.
Okay, so what is the difference between the three different ones that you've mentioned? For example, those ones that took place on the 13th of June.
Okay, there's many provisions in the bill, in the Act now, which didn't require prior consultation because they didn't require more regulations. So, for example, there's measures for many of your organs of state to share information. So, to share the information, for example, between the FIC, the police, the public protector, many investigating organs of state. Those come into effect immediately. Okay. Then there are measures which require regulations. So, for example, the whole measures related to know your customer or customer due diligence, that required sort of either the withdrawal of previous regulations and exemptions or new regulations. And what we've done is we've publish for comment the withdrawal notices and any other draft information. And once we get public comments, then we can finalize any new regulations or the withdrawals. And that should take us till the 2nd of October. So we've asked for public comments around the middle of July. Once we get those comments, we kind of review it, then we may put out either another draft or we may just put out the final regulations.
What are the area of focus that you'd like the public to comment on specifically?
Look, the key issue that we've asked for is that we are now adopting a risk-based approach, okay? Or for institutions to start adopting a risk-based approach. So at the moment, for example, if you go to your bank and you open an account, you are asked to verify your identification, you are asked to provide a utility bill with your address, okay? So those sort of measures are like a tick box. The bank has got to have that. What we now require the institutions to do is to say, look, can you try and sort of understand the risks your customers pose, okay? If they low risk, don't hassle them too much. In fact, try and make it as easy as possible. Have a customer-friendly approach, okay? Because I think for many of us, it's a real schlep. You know, you ask for your latest utility bill, it must be 3 months old. Today with technology, there's more modern ways
of doing that. But also there was a challenge because, you know, in the case of South Africa, not everybody might have actually a utility bill.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's why the whole issue of what we call financial inclusion, that if people don't have utility bills, I mean, you could even live in a formal house and only one person there has a utility bill. What it meant was many people were excluded effectively because they didn't have those documents. So we're trying to remove that type of bureaucracy.
Okay, for a general public, we're feeling that as much as we're trying to curb money laundering, tax evasion, you know, and people dealing with money for terrorism acts, I'm just an ordinary citizen just trying to get a bank account and transact and get somebody to send money to me. Why did I need to be put through all these processes?
Well, because look, from the late 1990s, or early 1990s, the world was trying to deal with drug syndicates. We lived in an era of secret bank accounts, okay? We had rulers on our continent and others, like in Nigeria, where leaders stole money and deposited funds, for example, in Switzerland, okay? This happened with Sani Abacha, the former dictator in Nigeria. And what happened is when the democratic government there under President Obasanjo tried to recover funds, they met with resistance like Swiss banks or European banks would say, look, you know, these are confidential customer relations. Even though they've been stolen, we can't give you that information. So the world developed rules to deal with such illegal flows. They dealt with, for example, many drug syndicates were also depositing their proceeds, which could be massive in other countries.
Okay, so which brings us to a conversation within the bill about people who are politically exposed persons. Because the question became, who will actually be affected by the amendment of this bill?
Okay, look, you know, you'll only be affected to the extent that it deals with the sort of front and back office operations of a financial institution, right? They've got to at least annually update their customer information, particularly with regard to what are called politically exposed persons. We don't use that notion in our law directly. We feed off that standard and we call them prominent influential persons, okay? Now, if you take those, there's categories defined in the bill. They include, for example, the president, ministers in cabinet, premiers,
and then
even
the private
judges.
sector, chairmans and CEOs.
Yes, now that's a new category which is not required elsewhere in the world, where we said the CEOs and other top officials of companies that do business with the state above a threshold. Okay, so a lot of those will be deemed. The bank will be forced to risk rate them. Now, if you're a politically exposed person from another country, so in other words, if you were Sani Abacha going to Switzerland, you're not just a politically exposed person, but you're a foreign politically exposed person. One of the comments is nobody will say no to bribery and corruption. I think former Deputy Minister Kabisi Jonas did say no. So there are lots of people who are honest. And I think, one relies on the honesty of most people. It's obviously trying to deal with the minority who are not honest.
Okay.
Now, what the FIC Act does is really provide a means to get information where you need to be able to explain the source of your funds.
Yes.
Okay. If there's mysterious movements between bank accounts where you're clearly trying to conceal the source of your funds, certainly what this act does, and has been doing, by the way, is just to alert the authorities that there's a potential suspicious transaction or somebody's walking around with too much cash. Okay.
Okay.
It's then up to the FIC to alert the criminal justice authorities. Okay, so the police. Then it's up to the enforcement authorities to do something.